Thanks everyone for joining us. Here from the Mid-Atlantic TAB team today, you had Becca. So you already heard from her. She's the coordinator extraordinaire for all of our webinars. So if you have any questions about today or after the event, please reach out to her. And I am Katie C. I'm the TAB lead here for EPA Region 3. And then Jared, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hey, I'm Jared Stewart. I'm the Community Development Associate on the team here, and I've been around for about 2 months now. Yeah, it's good to be here.
Thank you. All right, so just to give you a quick overview, Mid-Atlantic TAB, again, we provide technical assistance for brownfields, all your brownfield questions and the processes, helping you understand that, understanding how to navigate assessing a site, cleaning up a site, and hopefully redeveloping. And all the resources we provide are free. There are many ways we can provide assistance, one of which would be webinars like the one you have today. All right, I'm going to hand it over to John and Brett to introduce themselves because they are the stars of the show today.
Oh, Brett's got to go. Go ahead, Brett. You're first on the slide.
Okay, sounds good. She said your name first, so I wasn't sure. But yeah, I'm Brett. I work at EPA Region 3. I've been there for about 8 years. I'm also the Pennsylvania State Lead. So I primarily do outreach and have a lot of grantees in Pennsylvania. So yeah, looking forward to talking to you all today about threshold and all the changes to our guidelines and setting you up for grant success for this year's solicitation. Go ahead, John.
And hi, I'm John Gross. I am the environmental group manager of the Brownfields Redevelopment Group here in Pennsylvania. I work out of Harrisburg, and we're the ones that try to find you the money and the funding and help you out with the grant process and everything else. So yeah, we'll try to get you started in the right foot and make sure you're getting all the points that you need.
Thank you both. All right, so we want to let you know that today's webinar is intended to serve as kind of a part 2. We want to either encourage you to watch the webinar that we hosted back in August or re-watch it if you kind of forgot some of that information. But the webinar that we hosted back in August was meant to provide more of an overview of the types of EPA brownfield grants that are available and kind of help get you ready to start applying for those grants before the EPA grant announcements were made in September. So again, I would encourage you to go back, take a look at that. It's got a lot of information and broad overview of the types of grants and more information to help you as you start to prepare for that application. The purpose of today's webinar is for you to hear exactly from your sources with Brett on behalf of the EPA, as well as John with the Pennsylvania DEP. So those are the folks you're going to hear from today. We're just here to kick it off and then wrap it up at the end, but we encourage you to listen to what they have to say and take the time to ask any questions, and they'd be happy to answer them. And certainly you can follow up. EPA is certainly more limited now that the grant window is open. They're more limited in the type of information they can provide you with today, but John is here to help you again on behalf of the Pennsylvania DEP, and we are here as well. All right, brief agenda of what you're going to hear about today. Again, it's just an overview of the types of grants and eligibility, SAM.gov and threshold criteria, highlights of changes for the 3 types of grants that are currently open, information about the grant package, key information that you need to know about, and then information about TAB resources and the opportunity to ask questions. All right, this time I'm going to hand it over to Brett. Thanks, everyone.
Great. Thank you, Katie. So yeah, as I mentioned, I'm Brett. I work at EPA. Not only am I the Pennsylvania lead, I am also the revolving loan fund lead, which is exciting because this year revolving loan fund grants are being offered in our solicitation. So you could see pretty clearly here that multi-purpose grants are not offered this year. We'll still refer to them as MARC grants though. So keeping that multi-purpose acronym in there. Typically in the past, revolving loan fund grants and multi-purpose grants kind of rotate in and out every year. So when we're offering one, usually the other is on a hiatus that year and vice versa. But yeah, always offering the assessment and cleanup this time of year. Next slide. So this is what the timeline kind of looks like. This is current and active as of this year. So the solicitation that we request for applications is already out. It came out in September. So November 14th is the big deadline. That's the big date this year. So have all your applications in, no errors on November 14th. Make sure you're getting all those boxes checked right now. We'll go over some of those and what those might be. Get those in by November 14th. And so that gives us some time, usually in December timeframe, to review your threshold, which is basically just a pass-fail. Make sure you're eligible, you have an eligible entity, you're looking at eligible sites. There's no other, Superfund or other big laws related to some of the sites you're looking at, especially for cleanup grants. And then we'll let you know if your application did not make it to the next stage. So if you don't hear from us, that's a good thing. And that just means your application is good and free of threshold criteria errors. And so then in February and March, we'll look at your application. Typically, when I say we, that means one person from my team, from my Brownfields team in Region 3, and then one person from a Brownfields team in a different region, and then sometimes a federal partner as well. The three of us will look at your application. We'll rank it all based on different criteria, given a number score associated with each section. And then we'll also meet and talk about your application in person as well. So it's a pretty rigorous process for each grant, which is why it takes so long to hear back from us, because when you get in 60, 70 of these applications and you're ranking each one and then meeting about each one, it could take a little while. So in April, the headquarters will look at all our ranking evaluations and then basically select the grants that are going to get awarded. And in May, you would hear back to see if you were you're receiving an award. All right, so a lot of information on this slide. This is just an estimate. There's no guarantee. This is the number of awards that will happen in the United States, or it could go higher and lower. I think sometimes in the past, our cleanup grants have gone higher, and sometimes they've gone lower as well. So it all depends on how many applicants we get nationwide, because it's a national competition. A lot of information on the right-hand side. That's basically saying what is classified as a new and existing entity for assessment grants. So if you received a grant in 2017 or later, you're considered, or if your grant closed out in 2017 or later, you're considered a existing grantee. So in order to be considered a new grantee, it had to have been 2016 or earlier. And there's a different pot of money based on whether you're new or an existing grantee. So you could see there new grantees, there's an estimated 40 awards nationwide. Existing grantees would be 52. So oftentimes we'll see more existing grantees coming in for awards. So while the number is a little higher, it may be more competitive. Like I said, it all just depends on what applicants we get year in and year out. And then, yeah, you can see for cleanup, based on how much money you're applying for, there's a different set of awards that are estimated to be awarded nationwide. So the more money you're asking for, the less awards that are going out nationwide. So that's just good to note as well. And then the last thing I would note on this slide is the difference between the bipartisan infrastructure law funds and the regular appropriated funds. So if you are a cleanup or an RLF grantee, you're getting awarded through the bipartisan infrastructure law, which means that there will not be a cost share. So that's been since fiscal year 22. There's no cost shares with our cleanups and RLF grants. As soon as the bipartisan infrastructure law funds run out, then the cost share might come back. So still a good year to apply for RLF and cleanup funds this year and next year while we still have the bill funds. Okay. All right, so this is your eligibility slide. Not much has changed in the past couple of years related to eligibility. If you're, a redevelopment authority, a city, a county, state, you're still eligible to apply. While the state and tribe might be eligible for specific grants, such as we have an assessment grant specific for states and tribes now that others would not be eligible for, but just review the guidelines there. Nonprofit organizations are still eligible to apply as well. If you're a 501c3, you would be eligible to apply to any grant type. If you're a different nonprofit organization, you're still most likely eligible for cleanup grants. The only exception being if you're a 501c4 organization that lobbies. If you lobby, you're not allowed to apply for any Brownfields grant. If you don't lobby and you're a 501c4, you would have to certify that you do not lobby the federal government, and then you could be eligible for a grant. Okay. All right, so this chart and the next chart kind of looks confusing, but it's not that bad. I would just say if you have a specific grant currently, then I would just review this slide. For example, if you have a community-wide assessment grant, you could look down and see what you would be eligible to apply for this year. Oftentimes you would have to draw down at least 70% of that grant to be eligible to apply for a new grant of that same type. So if you're a community-wide assessment grant, you would have had to draw down the funds, prior to the end of the fiscal year, October 1st. And then you would be eligible to apply for a new grant. If you're a cleanup grant, which is our other common grantee, you could apply for almost any other type of grant except for a non-need member of an assessment coalition. You still have to draw down 70% of those funds. So I would just say if you have a specific, specific grant right now and you're looking to apply for a new grant, make sure you review this chart. If you don't have a grant right now, you could just ignore this whole thing. So next slide. And this one is also pretty specific. Basically, if you are a current or if you don't have a grant or whatever, you could apply for 2 grants at the same time, according to this chart. So the most common one being if you applied for an assessment grant and a cleanup grant at the same time, that is allowable. So you could do both at the same time, according to this chart. So obviously you can't apply for 2 assessment grants. You can't apply for 2 cleanup grants, 2 RLF grants, but a lot of times you can mix and match these grants to hopefully get one of the 2. I will say if you are trying to apply for a cleanup grant with the expectation that you are getting the assessment grant in the same year, that would not work. You need to kind of be prepared to get one grant or the other without having to rely on the other grant. So go ahead. All right, back to Katie, I think.
Thanks, Brett. All right. It's really important that you go ahead and have your SAM.gov account ready. I am no expert on SAM.gov, but I do understand the importance of it and how it can really hold up a process. So we wanted to present that early on in this webinar right now to again let you know if you haven't already, please go ahead and log into the SAM.gov account. You may already have someone signed up for it if your organization has already applied for some federal funding. So it may be a matter of just finding out who is actually registered and their information. So now's the time to go ahead and see whose information is in the system and is that accurate, or do you need to update it, change the name and the contact information. And you definitely want to make sure that the email and the phone number are relevant. You want to make sure that if you are the main person that you're actually listing a phone that you actually use often. So if you're listing a landline phone and you do a lot of hybrid work, you may need to do that because of the login, the way that needs to go. So you need to be able to acknowledge that, yes, this is me who's signing into my account. So again, little things that you may not think about, and changes can take a while to update in the systems, to make sure you do that now. And of course, the grant applications were actually released through grants.gov. And so all entities have to have that active registration through sam.gov. And you need to make sure that you have your unique entity ID. And so you need to make sure that you are ready to actually upload your application into grants.gov. So feel like I'm talking about a lot of websites here, but both of these are very important and they are critical for this actual application process. So again, when it comes to actually registering for sam.gov, you need to have your unique entity ID, your tax ID number, bank routing number, or the account type that you're going to be using. And then any non-federal entities have to mail the original. And send that in within 30 days of the activation. I think most things have gone digital now. So I know with the application in the past, they had been okay with, on occasion, some applications being actually mailed in, but now, it's really happening through grants.gov. So also be prepared for that. And then don't forget, if you already have a grant or you're looking to apply for a grant, you need to renew the account every year. So it's not just a one and done thing. You actually need to stay on top of this and make sure it's monitored. We always say, please, you don't have to pay for a service to help you with SAM.gov. We are happy to help facilitate any issues you may have. Again, we don't pretend to be experts on it, but I promise we can help knock on the doors and find any answers for questions that you may have. So please reach out to us. We're happy to be that first line for you. So if you have any questions about that, please reach out to us. I think that's everything. All right, back to you, Brett.
Perfect. Thanks, Katie. So yeah, now I'm just going to go over some of our threshold criteria, which is the pass-fail kind of criteria that is required of our grants. So go ahead, Jared. Oh, backwards. We could talk about SAM.gov a second time. All right, so threshold criteria. This, as I mentioned, is just pass-fail. So you got to check all the boxes, make sure you answer every single question. If there's one that doesn't apply, still provide, information that says why it doesn't apply. And then, just make sure you include all your attachments. If it asks for an attachment, sometimes, you'll respond to the criteria and then forget to put the attachment on the end of the narrative, which would also result in a fail. There are some specific things that we could come back and ask you for. I wouldn't count on it though. I'll just make sure you have it all ready and good the first time. And then, if it's a fail, we should notify you within 15 calendar days of the ineligibility determination. So you would know pretty quickly if you did not pass threshold. Go ahead. All right, so these are some specific threshold criteria for our grants that I kind of see issues with often. So the first thing being, you always have to work with your state agency. So for an assessment grant or for other grant types as well, cleanup grants, any grants, you have to notify your state agency that you're applying for a grant. This just kind of gives them a heads up of the work that's happening in the different state areas and kind of lets them be aware of your process for what communities are getting federal funds. Sometimes we see applicants submit a state letter from a previous year, and that is not permitted. Even if the sites are exactly the same, and nothing has changed, the community is the same, the information is the same, you still can't use a previous year's letter. For a cleanup grant, you have to show that you have done your characterization and your phase 2 assessment or equivalent. So like I said earlier, you kind of have to be ready to go with these cleanup grants. You can't try to ask for the grant and then all of a sudden there's more work that needs to be done and trying to figure out what you have to clean up and how much you have to clean up. So you kind of have to come in ready to go, know what contaminants you're dealing with and what levels of contaminants you're dealing with, so that your cleanup grant could just instantly be used on that site and funds could be drawn down to help remediate that property. And so that again, you have to work with the state agency on that, get that determination from them, make sure they're on board with you asking for federal funds for this cleanup. If you are applying for multiple grants, only one letter is required. Sometimes I would say just still try to do 2 letters. There's some information in the cleanup grant state letter that's a little different from the assessment grant. But if you notify them of both, then you should be okay. So go ahead. So this is specific for cleanup grants now. So in addition to having that site characterized and having your phase 2 done, you do need to be the sole owner of the site at the time of the application. So before November 14th and the time you submit this application, you need to own that property. So you can't, for assessment grants, for example, you could just have site access to the property. You don't need to own it. For the cleanup grants, you actually do need to own it. So show us that fee simple title, throw that in an attachment on the application, make sure that we are aware that you actually do own the property. The other big thing now is this AAI. Every single year that I do this for the past 8 years, I've seen applicants get, not pass threshold because of this AAI criteria. And what this is basically protection from CERCLA, which is our law that guides this program. So AAI, basically, you would have to acquire the property with a liability protection. And the main way to do that is on the right side here, which is to do a phase 1 environmental site assessment no more than 180 days prior to the property transfer. So if you did your phase 1 prior to purchasing the property, then you could show what the contamination was potentially on the property before you bought it, which in EPA's eyes then allows us to see that you were not responsible for that contamination, potentially because you saw that the contamination was there before you bought the property. So that's really important. It's something to note, especially in the threshold criteria. There's other ways to protect yourself from CERCLA, like an innocent landowner, and I think we'll actually get to a couple other ones in the next couple slides. So yeah, basically you can't be liable for the contamination. That's the most important thing for any of these grants. Some other threshold criteria for cleanup grants is this community notification and public meeting. So this slide's about the public meeting. Both of these have to kind of get done before the grant application is submitted. So the public meeting is showing your draft application that you have. Hopefully you're doing all this now in October. Consider the public comments, respond to them, show us that sign-in sheet, attach every document you have from the public meeting to the narrative information in your application. So throw it all in the back. Sometimes, like I said, these applications could be 100 pages long with all these attachments, but yeah, just make sure you're getting this done sometime before the application is submitted. Next slide is about the community notification. So again, this has to be happened before the application is submitted. This is just an ad in the local newspaper, or if you're in the newer age now, you could do some equivalent means to communicate with the target community, whether that be email blasts or some other kind of electronic method of reaching out to the community around you. And again, this has to happen no later than 2 weeks before the application is submitted. So this is happening sometime in October, preferably. Preferably earlier is better. And then you have to, for this community notification, so the APCA and show the draft application and where it's located, so that this is all just public information for your community to reference for this cleanup grant. All right. I think I'm talking about this one. Katie, stop me if I'm not, but
Yeah,
yes.
go for it.
All right, cool. So these are some new kind of brochures that TAB put together that are really helpful. This kind of relates, the part on the left kind of relates back to that AAI stuff that I had just said. So again, this is protection from CERCLA and making sure your site is eligible and ready to go. So the two main parts of our threshold criteria are applicant eligibility and then site eligibility. So this one is more about site eligibility. You basically want to make sure you're protected from CERCLA for the AAI. If you're not doing AAI, you could see in that first part there, exceptions to CERCLA liability. You could see there's other ways of being protected. One of them being if you're a state or local government that acquires a property through bankruptcy or tax delinquency or abandonment, at which point you would have had no chance to do a phase 1 prior to getting that property because that property was unwittingly given to you or abandoned to you. So that's one way. The other way is if you had owned the property prior to 2002. So 2002 is when our Brownfields law was put into order, and so any site prior to 2002 is almost like a grandfathered in kind of thing. So if you do have a site prior to 2002, which are getting less and less common, just read that info needed on the right side there, because that could be applicable to you. For section B, you can see those are for petroleum only sites. So, in addition to not being liable under any condition for the contamination on the property, there could be absolutely no viable responsible party. So not just you as the party that's not liable, but there can't be any other viable responsible party. And this is due to different laws that govern petroleum sites as opposed to hazardous substance sites. So oftentimes this is RCRA. So you can see on that third bullet there, the RCRA corrective action orders. the site can't be under a RCRA corrective action order or there any other, court orders or judgments or anything like that. And you have to have a letter from state, so from PAYDEP, that there is no viable responsible party that could clean up that property instead of receiving federal dollars to clean up that property. And so this is not just for cleanup grants. This is also for assessment grants or for RLF grants or any other grant. You have to make sure there's no viable responsible party for petroleum sites. Okay. And this is just kind of recapping some of the information we talked about. You have to be an eligible entity for assessment grants. You have to involve your community, let your community know about what's going on and what sites you plan to address. And then that third bullet there is somewhat newer in the past couple of years. If you have any contractors or subrecipients that you kind of already have going into the whole application process, you have to name those within the application. Sometimes that could get a little dicey with the contractors. Make sure you're still doing a fair and open bid, not just awarding a contractor without going through the whole federal process. And then, yeah, the last bullet there of expending grant funds to make sure you're eligible. So oftentimes, if you have an assessment grant, make sure you're drawing down at least 70% of those funds to apply for a new assessment grant. So those are your four big threshold criteria for assessment grants.
Thanks, Brett. We just wanted to point out that these are now on our website. The location could end up changing, but the link is going to take you to both of these handouts. And these are just meant to complement the actual threshold criteria that's come from the EPA. Not meant to replace it, just meant to hopefully interpret it a little bit better. Thanks, Brett.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. Sorry, I forgot to say, yeah, these are cool new handouts that they have. So want to make sure you guys are clicking on those links and getting the use out of them.
Yes.
Hey,
All right. Oh.
sorry to interrupt. We got a question in the chat that maybe you can answer. Redevelopment authorities may apply for community-wide assessment grants, but not apply as lead applicant on a coalition grant. Is that correct?
So redevelopment authorities could still apply as a lead applicant on a coalition grant. I would just refer back to those slides about what grants you currently have and what grants you don't have, just to make sure that you would be eligible for a specific entity. But yeah, I don't think there's any reason to not apply to not give a redevelopment authority as a lead for a coalition grant. I have coalition grants with redevelopment authorities as a lead. So
hey, Brett. Sorry, I just wanted to jump in on that. I do think the guidelines don't allow redevelopment authorities as the lead on a coalition. Oh. That changed after 2021, starting.
Thanks, Tony.
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to jump in because we have had questions like that, and that was one of the updates in the guidelines since I think FY22.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm too old for the program. I remember the days where they were.
No worries.
They were still allowed. So thanks, Tony. I appreciate you being on the call for that. Sorry for the wrong information.
Thank you both.
All right. So next up, we have some changes to the ARC grants for fiscal year 25. So these are brand new changes, and we'll go through a couple of them. So first, for assessment grants, if you are a non-lead coalition member, one of your non-lead coalition members has to have never been awarded a MARC grant. So that's kind of the big one for this, for assessment coalitions. In the past, it's within the last 7 years, but this has to be a brand new entity for the non-lead member. If there's any other non-lead coalition members, again, that 70% is the important number here. So if you're a non-lead coalition member, make sure you're drawing down 70% of those funds for the MARC grant. And then, yeah, that last bullet was just about, it's a change from past years where hopefully you have a community-based nonprofit as a non-lead member, but it's no longer required. So, nonprofits are good to be within the community, but it's not required anymore. So that's good to note as well. Yeah, revolving loan funds, there's not really any major new changes for this grant type. Some of the changes just happen to be what the changes were last year because they weren't offered last year. So there's some new information on climate and environmental justice that were incorporated last year. But obviously, since revolving loan funds weren't offered, all that information got incorporated this year. But yeah, no new major changes for RLFs. Cleanup grants. So I would say of all the changes, this is definitely the biggest and most dramatic. The main thing here being that hazardous building material, such as asbestos and lead-based paint. There's been a new kind of discovery that if those materials haven't leached out outside of the building to the the outdoor, to the groundwater, air, or any of the land around it, then technically CERCLA doesn't apply to it. If those, if asbestos or lead-based paint has leached out and gone into nature, then obviously you could ignore this, and that would still be, you'd have to get your CERCLA liability and go through the whole process. But if all those materials have been have remained in the building, then all you have to do is show that you've taken reasonable steps to make sure that hasn't left the building, and that you are not liable for any kind of reason that those materials should leave the building. So it's kind of a big difference this year than we've seen with previous years. So yeah, if there's like no roof on a building or something like that, that wouldn't apply, because then a lot of this could be getting into the groundwater and getting into the air. But if you have a pretty good building that's structurally founded on good land and good materials, then you might be able to address these contaminants without having to get CERCLA liability. Questions?
All right, we just had one question. Do we have any more before we proceed? There will still be time at the end too.
Cool.
All right.
Brett, you did a perfect job, apparently.
Huh, thank you. All right, on
And
to you
just
then.
for that, John, it's your turn.
Good morning, everybody. So we're going to get into the grant package piece of this, and you can go ahead to the next slide. So there's two kind of parts to the grant package. There's the narrative information sheet and then the narrative, which gets confusing because they're kind of the same thing, but they're very different. So the narrative information sheet is more just about your stuff. It should not include any summary or project overview or anything like that. You can't exceed this 3-page limit. If you do, it'll be redacted. And it isn't part of the ranking criteria, but it is necessary that you put it on your official letterhead. So some of the things that are involved in this are the applicant identification. So the idea, like your name, your full address, who's applying for it, who's doing what we need to do. Thanks, Katie. And then the website, funding requested. Like, what are you applying for? What loan or what grant are you applying for? What, is it a cleanup? Is it a multi-site cleanup? Is it a assessment grant? Whatever that case may be. Location of the properties, location of the city, the state, county, depending on who's applying and what you're applying for. Property information, name, address of each location that you're applying for, and that kind of things, contact information, populations. Goes into these other factors, and the other factors, depending on which one you're applying for, if it's a cleanup grant or an assessment grant or LF, those changed a little bit. But generally speaking, you're looking at things like you're going to be proposing a brownfield site that's impacted by mine-scarred land. Is there renewable energy piece to it? Is there, cleanup site that's going to be good for adaptive climate change? Anything to that effect. And the idea is basically you have to answer all of these kind of other factors. And I think each of the grant guidelines has a chart. Basically, make sure you answer each of those. And if it doesn't apply, make sure that you state that it doesn't apply. And the last thing kind of that you're looking for is from the letter support. We'll get more into that later in the slides, but just keep in mind, and this is kind of a warning for the beginning, that do not put any kind of private information into any of these applications. Don't put your personal email addresses, don't put your personal phone numbers, your checking account number, any of that kind of stuff. You just don't put that in there, because it may be publicly, which actually is publicly available, but it may be put on a website, or if a FOIA request comes in, somebody could actually gather that information. So just don't put anything personal on there. And I think that covers that slide. You can move to the next slide. And then we'll get into kind of the narrative and the ranking criteria. And this is there's a lot of information here, and it kind of depends on which one you're looking into, but into applying for. But the narrative is either a 10-page or a 12-page, depending on if it's cleanup assessment grant. That's 10-page. RLF is 12. You cannot exceed that. It is 10 single-spaced pages. If you exceed that, they're going to just stop reviewing. It should include clear, concise, and factual responses to all the ranking criteria. If you miss the ranking criteria, you're not going to get points in that, and that's what you don't. And if it doesn't apply, make sure you clearly state that that ranking criteria thing that you're talking about doesn't apply to your application. They have to reference the criteria number, title, and do not exceed to restate the full text. So basically, in other words, just keep everything concise and clear. Make sure you know you're answering the question that you're supposed to be answering. It has to address specific factors like community population, the site's proximity to water, floodplains, leveraging commitments, anything energy efficiency, climate resiliency, anything like that. The environmental justice. There's a lot of things that go into it, and they kind of break these down into 4 different kind of sections. Which first section is the project description and the plan for revitalization. This is things like the overview of the challenges of the target areas, the description of the priority brownfield sites to make sure you're identifying the sites that you're targeting, and identifying additional sites if there are other additional sites. And also things like revitalizing of the target, like talk about how your reuse strategy is going to look, and how it aligns with the revitalization plan for the general area, outcomes and benefits of the reuse strategy. Make sure you kind of tell that story of what it's going to be used for, how it's going to benefit the community, and that kind of thing. Strategy for leveraging resources. If you're going to be using this this grant to leverage more resources, or you have other resources that you're going to use to leverage the grant. In most cases, I think the general stuff right now is coming from the BIL funds, which do not require a match. But if you do require a match for the funds that you're going after, you obviously have to prove that you've got that available. Use of existing infrastructure. If you're revitalizing a site that already has water, sewer, blah blah blah, make sure you talk about that and how you're going to use that as part of the deal. The next section is about the community needs and community engagement. This is pretty self-explanatory. Why do they need funding? Why does that community how's it going to benefit? Is there threats to sensitive populations based on things like EPA's EJ screen? Is there an environmental justice piece to this and identify that? Make sure you talk about it. Go through all that information and tell a good story on that. Community engagement. How are you going to get the community involved? How are you incorporating the community input that comes from all this stuff? What's the next steps on that? And we'll just kind of go through each of these. The task descriptions, that one's pretty self-explanatory too, but each one of these, again, has a section that has a point total value. And in the guidelines, you'll see it breaks it down. You have to answer each one of these sections individually, make sure that you're putting something in there about that. And again, if it doesn't apply, state that it doesn't apply, so that you can make sure that you're getting all those points that you can get. But the program, the task descriptions, costs, program measures, deals with things like program description. How's your program dealing with this? The marketing strategy of what you're going to do with the whole grant, handling of the grant and that sort of thing. Description of the task, activities, how are you going to use the money? What are you going to use it for? Specifics of how much you think that's going to cost and all that kind of good stuff. That goes into the cost estimates and the plans, the measures of how are we going to evaluate the environmental progress that we've made after we've implemented these cost and projects that we're putting together. So that kind of gives you an overview of the actual physical things that you're going to be doing and the cost of those things. And then programmatic capabilities. So this is like your organizational capacity. How's your organization structured? You talked about your staff and their their, qualifications and expertise. Talk about, acquiring additional resources. Is part of this going to be, you're going to have to bring other contractors or subrecipients in to kind of do some of the work. Do you have a previous EPA Brownfields grant? If you do, make sure that you tout your accomplishments and what you've done. If you haven't, and you want to talk about other grants that you've received or other ways that you've done federal and non-federal assistance, that's always good to know, because the EPA wants to know that if they give you this money, you're going to be able to handle it. You're going to be able to take care of what's going on and make sure that you can spend it properly. And if you have no prior assistance, make sure that you kind of put down how you're going to handle the grant and what you're going to do with it and how it's going to go through. So I think that's pretty much it for that slide. Go to the next slide. And yeah, go ahead. So this is talking about the letter, which Brett mentioned earlier. So our letter, basically, if you're asking us for a letter, we want to know a couple of things. We want to know what you're applying for. What what grant you're applying for, how much money you're applying for, who the letter should be addressed to. This is all kind of stuff that you see on that right hand side there. Make sure you give us a couple of weeks. We'd like. We've done them in a day. We can. It's fine. Those folks that kind of are like, oh crap, I'm gonna apply for this on November 13th. It's certainly fine. We can do that. However, if there is a situation, that's for the assessment grants, for the RLFs, it's pretty simple. We're basically we want a little piece of what you're doing. You can send us the whole grant package if you want to, but we're going to take a snippet of that, put it in a support letter, and say, hey, we support you doing this project, and asking for money from EPA. But if you go to the next slide, we talk about the cleanup grant and the things that we need to do for the cleanup grant. We do need a little extra time for that. This is where we typically ask for a good 2 weeks. We need to review those assessment results. Typically, when you're in the cleanup phase of things and you're in the Act 2 program, you've probably already enrolled. You've probably already done a cleanup plan, which means that assessment review has already been done. We kind of understand what you're doing and how you're doing it. But our state letter has to affirm that you're eligible and that you've done enough of that to make sure that you can do the cleanup part come the time you get the money. You don't have to have all that done now, but you do have to prove to us that you think there's going to be a sufficient level that done by the summer of 2025. It would be. You don't have to be in Act 2 to do this. And Brett talked about earlier about the changes to some of that stuff. That the asbestos is now available for the cleanup grant. We have a similar program in PA that has it's ISRP, the Industrial Sites Reuse Program, and it's used a lot to do asbestos cleanup. If you are not eligible for Act 2, that's also okay. We can put that within our support letter to you, but we have to kind of have assurances from environmental professional that you've done a sufficient level of kind of characterization to understand what you're going to need to do to remove that asbestos, what you're going to need to do to remove lead paint or whatever whatever that case may be. And then at that point, once we have all that, we can then understand the next piece of what you're doing. The quotes of the remediation would be helpful too, so we can kind of understand what you're looking at and that kind of thing. And then please submit those directly to me at the email you see there, and I think the emails are later in the program, but as soon as possible. But give us those at least those 2 weeks to kind of get through this, because we do have to go to our regional staff, make sure that if you're in the Act 2 program, that you've submitted a cleanup plan, or that you're planning on submitting a cleanup plan, that you're enrolled in Act 2. If you're not enrolled yet, why you're not enrolled, what's going on. So that takes a little bit of time just to kind of make sure that we have those cleanup grant support letters ready for you in time for the application. I think that's pretty much it for me. Are there any questions at this point for me? And Katie, I think that was my last slide. Am I correct with that?
Yes.
Okay, good.
So back to Brett.
Cool. back to me. So these are some of the forms that you'll have to submit. Just a couple more slides here, I think. So just some of the forms you'll have to submit along with your work plan and your budget detail. Or sorry, that comes later in the process. You don't need the work plan, budget detail yet. But these are some of the forms you have to submit with your application. So make sure you're just kind of following along and have them all kind of synced up with each other. Now, the authorized representative on one form should be the same authorized representative on another form. But there's instructions for each of these forms kind of available on our website. So if you have any questions about them, just look them up and you'll get the samples. And the link is there too. So once Katie sends out this PowerPoint slides, you could just easily find that.
Correct.
And so the last slide here, I think, is the grant debrief. So, if you've applied in the past and you haven't gotten an award, you were offered the chance for a grant debrief and hopefully you took it. Typically, this will help you bolster your application for the next year. So at least with my grant debriefs, I don't know about every project officer, I kind of go section by section with you and kind of tell you what some of the weaknesses were in your previous year. So you should be able to use that information to enhance your application for the current year. Which also, if you don't get it this year, don't get discouraged. Just always ask for your grant debrief, and hopefully your grant will get stronger and stronger every year. And yeah, when in doubt, check the FAQs. Even I check the FAQs still. I'll have to go back and re-up on my redevelopment authority FAQs. But yeah, check the FAQs. They're a wealth of information and always really helpful. There's some new stuff on there too, especially that asbestos and lead-based paint. That's one of the FAQs, a brand new FAQ on there. So yeah, make sure you check that out and find out some more information. Any questions now?
I'm going to jump in here. We have a post-webinar poll I'll be sharing here. It has 2 questions on it. I'm sharing that now. The first question is, how prepared do you feel to write an EPA Brownfields Grant application after receiving support and resources? And the second question is, what other topics or activities would you like to see included in future TAB events? And if anyone's having trouble finding the poll, let me know.
Thanks, Jared. That helps with our metrics. Did anyone think of any questions while the poll started?
I don't have a question, but I did think of one thing that I didn't talk about. If you are so generously gifted one of these grants, the narrative actually becomes part of that kind of binding work plan that you're going to deal with the EPA. So once you get selected, and if you haven't been selected yet, you'll go through this process where you get the notification that you're selected, and then you'll get a day to make sure that the work plan that you've already not prepared is done. No, I'm kidding. I'm messing with you. You usually get a couple weeks to go through this process to kind of change your narrative into the actual work plan of what you're doing. So EPA doesn't really like it if you go in with a narrative that says, I'm going to do all these grandiose things, and then you come back and say, my work plan, I'm going to do this other thing that we didn't talk about in the narrative. They're not going to be okay with that. So the idea is make sure that the narrative is what your plans to do. EPA will allow you to make changes to that plan and understand that things change, that maybe a site no longer is a viable site and you can't do that anymore. Maybe not necessarily for a cleanup plan, but if you have like a 10 site assessment kind of target area and one of those sites kind of goes away, or somebody bought it in the meantime and took it over, they're going to allow you to change that into have another site available. And Brett, if I'm talking out of school, please let me know. But they're pretty flexible about that sort of thing. But if you go in with these 10 sites and say, well, those 10 sites don't really work, we're going to go these other 10 sites, they're probably going to give you some flack on that one. So just know that narrative form is the form that's going to kind of form that work plan that you're going to deal with in the next step.
All good information. Thanks, John.
Mm-hmm.
So we just want to remind you how we can be of assistance as you go through this process. particular to this particular season of the year, in grant season, we can help with grant writing assistance. Can't write the grant, but we can help you when it comes to taking a look and crafting those particular sections in your application. So, and we can also review them. So reach out to us if you have any questions or would like some assistance with that. I think this also lets you know other ways that we can help as you go through your brownfield process. And here are some deadlines we want you to keep in mind. If you would like us to review your grant or provide some assistance, we do ask that you submit by November 1st to allow us the opportunity to have plenty of turnaround for you. Same, about 2 weeks to submit your letter to John with the Pennsylvania DEP. And of course, the big reminder is November 14th is the actual deadline for your grant application. Please do not wait and submit it at 11 p.m., you know, college style. So
I laugh, but I know somebody's going to do it.
and we've all done it for something.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why I keep going backwards. Just a reminder of contact information. Again, your EPA friends are a little bit limited in what they can actually help you with at this particular time. But please do reach out to them at any other time of year. Hope you've enjoyed the opportunity to get to hear from Brett and John and hear how, you know, they can help with all your brownfield journeys. And there's the contact information. The slide deck will be made available to you. Becca is going to send emails out to everyone who signed up, and that's going to include the PowerPoint presentation, which will have links for you, and of course, contact information, and she will also provide a recording of the webinar.